Hi, this is Mary Eggleston. I'm here with Sarah Schaffner, and we are here to do the next episode, episode 10 of Unscripted Let's Talk. And we're continuing with our talk about dysfunctional families and what happens to people who grow up in dysfunctional families, and hopefully getting some understanding and hope out there. So last time, we left our listeners, Sarah, with a cliffhanger.
We did.
We did. What is it like to grow up in a dysfunctional family? And where you don't know what's really going on, where nobody talks, you can't trust, you can't feel, where the parents are in the family are preoccupied with worry or secrets, or they're filled with fear, with self-doubt. And, I think we described, the impaired person, the enabler, and so now, what are these roles? Because people are not allowed to be who they are when the architects of the family are preoccupied and afraid. So what happens when a child is born to this circumstance? And we could look at a couple of scenarios. I think of one that's kind of dramatic, where maybe the dad has physically attacked the mother, maybe threatened one of the children. And you don't have to see that more than once in your family to know that it can happen, and to live in fear then that it will. And so that absolutely impacts everyone in the family. You know that you can't speak freely. You certainly can't giggle and laugh and run around, because you don't know when dad's going to lose it again. And you certainly don't want to try to find out. Another idea that comes to me is one that's really common too, is Cold War, where the parents are just not getting along. Maybe they're arguing in private. They don't even think their kids are listening, or they're not even talking at all. They have little to do with each other. And that puts all of the kids in the family, again, in that position where you can't really be yourself. The air is so thick, you can cut it with a knife.
Right.
So two stories come to mind. And one of them is a woman that I worked with who told me about her father, who she, as we talked, realized was alcoholic. A lot of people don't realize that, yes, that's alcoholism, until I help them understand what alcoholism is, which incidentally, a quick and dirty definition of alcoholism, it's not about how much you drink or how often. It's about what happens when you drink. And so people always have really odd ideas about that. So we'll have to do a podcast on that so that people understand what alcoholism is. Anyway, her father would threaten she and her sisters and her mother. And one time she bravely stood up to one of her siblings, and he threw her up against the wall and was choking her. Her entire family froze and watched. No one stepping in.
Wow.
Because everybody's just frozen in just complete terror. And she said, I thought I was going to die. And he let go. And you can imagine how free everybody felt in the house after that. When I met her, she was not a pound overweight. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. Very successful. Very careful and clear in how she talked. And she came to me because she had all these weird fears of storms, of loud noises. She felt bad about herself because she, for instance, she attended a church with very rigid rules, and of course she could never live up to that. She had divorced her first husband, who was violent, and she couldn't forgive herself for that. She was terribly unhappy. I don't know how else to put it. And so this fear that she had from growing up in this place, even though she worked so hard to be perfect, really created a lot of misery for her in her life. Another man that I worked with years ago had 2 PhDs, and the only reason he came to see me, the hero doesn't come for therapy unless things get really, really, really bad. They are the least likely, because they've been put up on a pedestal in their family. They're the greatest. They're the most wonderful. They're the captain of the football team, the head of student council, the one with musical talent. their homecoming queen, all these different things.
So it wouldn't make sense for some in that person's mind that there might be something that
they have no
underlying.
problem. Look how successful
They're fine.
I am. Yeah, I'm fine. So this guy had 2 PhDs. He worked all the time, which is part of why his daughter was out of control. She was trying to get his attention. He had achieved so much in his field, but it never felt like enough. It was never enough. And he admitted to me that he wanted to win the Nobel Prize. And I said, well, would that be enough? And he knew it wouldn't.
There was never going to be enough.
It was never going to be enough because his father was never going to give him the approval that he sought. His mother was never going to be, relevant enough to give him the love that he needed. And ironically, his parents were dead.
Wow.
But he was still operating in this place of, I'm only as good as my last achievement. In some ways, this is referenced too in Alice Miller's work, Drama of the Gifted Child, which speaks of that child in a family who really can sense what the family needs and is willing to die trying to make it happen. So there are so many stories I could tell about heroes and how hard they try, including like a man named Jerry who essentially used to have a show that he watched with his mom, who was so terribly unhappy because she had an impaired alcoholic or depressed husband. And as he talked about it, he said, it's kind of like my mom and I had a date, and he was her emotional support, which also, as you know, happens with that hero child.
That hero role. Yeah.
Because the person married to an impaired person, their emotional needs are not met. They often emotionally take one of the children as their confidant, as the emotional support they're not getting anywhere else. And it's quite a high price that the hero pays.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the characteristics of the hero. So on the outside, they look like they're put together, everything is fine. They probably bring the family a sense of pride because with all the dysfunction, a family can't be dysfunctional or impaired if they've raised such a wonderful, successful child.
Yeah. Look at him. Look at her. Yeah, my daughter's the homecoming queen. I worked with a woman who there were beatings daily in the home she grew up with. She said, Mary, I became so adept at socializing because it beautifully hid what was happening in my life at home. She said, I was the homecoming queen.
Right.
And she said, but nobody had ever even been to my house. And everybody voted for me because I could be all things to all people. Mm-hmm. Her parents were so proud of her.
Right.
Yeah.
Which it's not uncommon for the hero to be successful academically, in sports, socially, whatever kind of their natural talents are, they'll excel at it. Yeah.
In their career when they get older.
Mm-hmm.
I had a man who came to me and he said, I'm terribly unhappy. My wife doesn't love me. We barely talk. We live in a huge house. He said, Mary, I'm worth $50 million. And I've hesitated thinking, well, it's going to cost me so much to get divorced. Then it occurred to me, $25 million is still enough money. Finally, it was enough. And he went forward in terms of, he was not mean to her, mm-hmm. but they hadn't spoken in years, literally hadn't spoken. They lived in a huge house. She lived on one end, he lived on another. And he wanted to push through and actually dare to have a life and blow everything up, which is another thing with the hero, is if they decide to get well, if they decide mm-hmm. to get help, they have to come off their pedestal.
Yeah.
And that's no small thing.
Right. Because that's what we said on the outside, that sense of pride and that well put together face. But when, like you said, if you start to heal, then you start to get into what's underneath that, what all of that has really been hiding, mm-hmm. which
is of course a lot of pain and feelings of inadequacy.
Yeah.
And how do I manage that? And how do I admit to people that I'm not perfect?
Right.
That I don't have this perfect life. And the other thing the hero is going to bump into is that people are terribly jealous of them. Mm-hmm. Very jealous of them. And so
Even other family members.
that's correct. Even other family members. I have worked with so many women who tell me of their mother's jealousy of them, and the snide remarks they make about their daughter's career or how she looks or what she does. And one woman just taking so much pleasure when her daughter went through a divorce, enjoying her pain. And just no support. On the surface, of course, acting like, oh, of course, sweetie. But then she'd hear from her siblings that mom's just trashing her.
Right.
Because she's delighted. Absolutely delighted. Because the hero tends to leave the family early.
Right.
That's the other interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're on fire to be really, successful and work their butts off. But I'll tell you what, they turn 18, 19, they're out of there.
And oftentimes, we're going to talk about the scapegoat next, but oftentimes their role changes from the hero to the scapegoat because they left the family and they abandoned the family, and now they're, within the family. In their life, obviously, they continue to be successful, but within the family structure, they're seen as somebody who's left and abandoned.
You abandoned us.
Right.
Yeah, we're not good enough for you anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
of course, if you've been the emotional support of your mother or your father, they don't want you moving much more than down the street. And I see that people who live down the street from their goofy family, or even next door to their goofy family.
Right.
I mean, like, what's up with that? And that doesn't mean that anybody who lives down the street from their family or next door, but in these instances, yikes.
Right.
Is my response. Like, what? I'm going to stick around, and because I can't handle that feeling I've lost my role in the family. But then the resentment and the anger, of course, becomes enormous.
Right. And the heroes obviously are known for carrying a lot of guilt as well. And
so they tend to marry people who are irresponsible, maybe out of control, emotionally unstable, because then I can continue to be the hero.
Right.
And that's when I go to one of my favorite phrases when I bump into this in my office of every saint needs a sinner. I don't know, I can't be the hero if you're not willing to be the loser.
Right.
And I gotta have somebody that I look good, and I still gotta continue that role. And so they almost, and they don't, this is not done consciously.
Right.
But they almost disable anybody that they're with. I don't really want you to function. So they're pulling the rug out from under them.
Right.
I'm thinking of this man he was married to a woman who really was morbidly obese. And she began on a new lifestyle and was really moving along pretty well. And 1 week she only lost like 2 pounds. And he sent a cake to her office with 2 pounds written on it. Now that's, the cruelty of that is stunning, but he was terrified. If she loses her weight, she'll leave me.
Yeah.
And he would bring home donuts and all kinds of stuff. She'd say, don't do that. Please don't do that. And he goes, why? You don't have to eat it. I mean, just stuff like that. It's really interesting. So now I'm actually afraid that I'm not good enough for you.
Right.
And so if you start to get well, so there's just so many dynamics that we could talk about.
Yeah.
So many.
That inadequacy definitely plays out in so many different forms.
Yeah. So if we move now to the scapegoat, you think, okay, so you're the next child, and maybe you don't have the physical prowess or the musical talent or the looks or whatever it would be to even begin to compete with your sibling. Or maybe it just looks to you like, well, that role's taken. Or perhaps you're so deeply sensitive, you're the type of person, empathic, where you absorb the pain in the family. And kind of like a SpongeBob SquarePants, you're like absorbing all of the pain in the family. And then you start to believe you are the pain in the family. And this is the child in the family who acts out, who essentially becomes a siren for the family, yelling, screaming, using drugs, having sex, staying out all night, all kinds of...
angry, rebellious.
Yeah, a lot of anger, a lot of fighting. And that's the kid that's brought into my office, and the family will say to me, fix them, otherwise we're okay. We are A-okay, just they're the problem. They're the only problem we have. The first thing I say to that kid when I'm talking to him or her is, look, you're not the problem. You are manifesting something. I don't know what it is.
Right.
I guess we'll find out. I think of a 15-year-old girl that I worked with where she was, angry, bitter, anorexic, doing all kinds of stuff that made the family look bad. They looked bad.
Right.
And what emerged was Dad was busy hiring prostitutes, one after another. And Mom was trying to keep the lid on that. Well, yeah, I don't think she was the problem. I think she was reacting to some serious toxic atmosphere in her home.
And that's what scapegoats do, is they bring a distraction from what's really going on to the family, within the family, and then, the distraction becomes whatever issue the scapegoat is presenting with.
Yeah. And so if you were the scapegoat in your family, you probably feel awful about yourself. Like you're this loser, you're just a really bad person. Because in the midst of that pain, you probably said some pretty horrible things, and you probably lost it more than once. Maybe you took it out at a sibling. You did all kinds of things, but really you're reacting to the atmosphere within the family. And that does not mean that you don't need to own your own behavior.
Right.
None of that means that. But it's trying to understand and getting out from under an imposed role that, that was placed on you, and knowing that you're more than that.
Right. And recognizing that hostility or that anger is just a cover, again, for a lot of hurt, a lot of rejection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So both of these roles are actually designed to help the family. The hero's trying to bring self-worth to the family. The scapegoat is ironically screaming to try to get the family help. I'll become the problem. I'll become the person, and it is the scapegoat that is the most likely to get help. That's the upside of being the scapegoat.
Absolutely.
The hero is the least likely because they're oddly successful and they don't like to give up being on that pedestal.
Yeah.
They really, really don't. It's painful to not be the one who's the most admired, the most amazing, the most perfect person you've ever met. The scapegoat's kind of happy to find out that, oh my God, really, it wasn't me. I'm not evil. I'm not dark and evil. Well, that's kind of a thrill.
Right.
So they're a little more open to help.
Right.
But of course, what all this takes, if you're going to begin to move in a direction of understanding what it meant for you if you were the hero, if you were the scapegoat, or the other true roles that we'll be talking about next time, it really takes deconstructing your belief about yourself. Because honestly, and I'm talking to the listeners, you have a whole story that you've told yourself that you've laid on top of the story that is true. People don't remember their story from the standpoint of that they were a child in the story. Well, I could have done this and I could have done that. No, you couldn't. When you're 6, you cannot go get your own place.
Right.
And when you're 6 or 10, you don't know that the issues between your mom and dad. You're trying to do your best, as is everybody in a family like this, because people don't know what to do. And then, ironically, you go forward and you recreate it then in your life one way or another. So it's an incredible thing. People think, oh, I've chosen my spouse, love of my life, from this place in their mind and their heart. And really, whatever your deepest wound is in there, helping you choose somebody to help you heal with that wound. And again, that's another podcast.
Yeah, that one deserves its own.
So, what are we saying? Beginning to look at your story and realize that you were a child, and seeing it through the eyes of a child, and instead of standing against yourself, to stand with yourself. I often show people, you are standing over here saying these things to this little person inside of you. And you're joining the adults against this little person who is actually trying as hard as she can to be the best person she can be. And you need to begin to stand with the child. And then people go, but then you're telling me to blame my parents. And I think, we need to tell the story correctly.
Right.
And yes, there needs to be accountability. It's true. I don't promote hate. I don't promote, blaming other people for your choices. But I do promote waking up and seeing what really happened and what you carry, and then what your agreements are that you made long ago as a child, as Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in his book, The Four Agreements. You make these agreements with people, with your parents, that I'm going to be this because it's what you need. I'm going to be this because that's what pleases you. Unfortunately, very rarely do parents really look and say, who is this child?
Right.
Who do I have here? How do I help you be who you came here to earth to be? Instead of imposing what I believe you are, what I believe you should be. I see this even with the way kids choose their college majors. We need to go into business. It's got to be business. You need a business degree.
Right.
My parents did that to me, and I said, well, okay, and I tried a semester of it, and I hated it. And it's, I just hated it. But yes, I actually took economics, political science. I took accounting. I took all these, and I took marketing. I took all these different business courses, and I kind of liked the marketing. That's kind of interesting. But then I went back to psychology. And my dad said to me, what are you going to do with a degree in psychology? To which I said the only thing that I could think of. It blurted out of my mouth. I don't know, maybe I'll wait tables, but I love it, so it's what I'm going to do. But you've got to do this. You got to make up for the mistakes I made. So you've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just tough to emerge and be who you actually came to this earth to be.
Right.
So there's two more roles that we're going to discuss next time, the lost child and the mascot. And then we'll talk more, I think, beyond that, because actually, since we've presented this so thoroughly, it won't take as much time to describe the lost child and the scapegoat, the lost child and the
mascot.
But it rounds it out, and you'll start to realize that you probably major in one and you minor in the others. So, time for Sarah's wrap-up.
My wrap-up. I think what you said earlier has stuck with me in terms of we have our genuine true story, and then we pile on all these other stories that have been imposed upon us. And I think hopefully going through these sessions, and if everyone listens to these podcasts, will bring a little bit of light to what role you maybe played, because I think sometimes people live their life without realizing there is a genuine story underneath the stories that we've piled on top. So I hope that if you have found yourself in either a scapegoat role or a hero role, or are witnessing that within your own current family, that this is something that you take seriously and build some awareness around.
Yeah. And instead of being the hero of your family, be the hero of your own story.
Right.
Realize, as Carl Jung said, you don't have this little bitty story. You actually have a big story. And you have to slay your dragons in order to become who you truly are meant to be. So, until next time, please remember to live with intention, purpose, and passion.